rate a year ago. And the 3-month year-over-year average through March was up by 1.6%, and that compares with 1.9% a year ago. Growth was strongest in the western regions of the country and in the southeast. And when I refer to the regions, I'm talking about the HUD-defined regions. The northwest region led growth at 2.4%. This next map shows the percentage change in home sales during the 12 months ending in March 2017. Sales market conditions around the country remain relatively balanced, with tighter markets in the Northwest, the Rocky Mountains, and the Great Plains. And just as a bit of background, balanced conditions exist when the quantity of housing supplied equals the quantity demanded. Soft markets occur when the quantity of housing supplied exceeds the quantity demanded, and we have a surplus of housing. And tight markets exist when demand exceeds supply, and we have a shortage of housing. Based on CoreLogic data, new and existing home sales were up by 1% during the 12 months ending March 2017 compared with a year ago. New home sales were up by 5%, and traditional resales, which exclude REO sales and short sales, were up by 4%, while REO and short sales were down by 19% and 15% respectively. REO stands for real estate owned, which means that the lender now owns the property. Sales were up or unchanged in every region of the country, except for a 2% decline in the Southwest and a 1% decline in the Rocky Mountains. You can see both of those regions highlighted in brown. The largest increases occurred in the Pacific and in the New England. Both were up by 5%. Inventories of new homes for sale were up by 9% from a year ago, and they were down 7% for existing homes. And the supply of existing homes continues to decline. The sales vacancy rate was 1.7% in the first quarter. This was unchanged from a year ago. Foreclosures and delinquencies continue to decline around the country. On a national level, 2.5% of all homes were 90 or more days delinquent in foreclosure or in REO as of March 2017. This is down from a rate of 3.2% in March of 2016. And the rate continues to decline in every region of the country, which has been the trend now for the last 3 years. The rate does remain the highest in the New York, New Jersey region at 5.3%, despite a 1.4 percentage point decline from last year. Now we're going to look at home prices based on the 3 most popular home price indices. All 3 home price indices show that home sales prices continue to increase in the first quarter of 2017. This figure shows the year-over-year change in the home price indices on a monthly basis. And all 3 indexes have shown year-over-year price increases since early 2012, where you can see all 3 of those lines up above that 0 mark. In March of 2017, the CoreLogic index, which is shown in black, was up by 7% from a year ago, while the FHFA index in red and the S&P index in blue were up by 6% relative to a year ago. This map shows the change in the monthly CoreLogic index on a state level from 1 year ago. Again, nationally, the increase was 7%, and prices were up in all states except for Alaska and West Virginia, which are shown in brown, and in Mississippi, where prices remained unchanged. In Alaska and West Virginia, the decline was very slight by only 1%. Prices in the 2 lighter shades of blue increased by less than or equal to the national average, and prices in the darkest shade of blue were up by more than the national average. And that was led by Washington State with an increase of 13%, and Utah, where prices were up by 10%. The largest increases were concentrated in the Northwest, and according to the Census Bureau, the median price of a new home in the first quarter was down by 2% from a year ago. And according to our friends at the National Association of Realtors, the median price of an existing home was up by 7% from a year ago. Let's take a brief look now at the rental markets around the nation. All regions in the country have rental markets with tight or slightly tight conditions, except for in the Southwest. This has the highest regional vacancy rate. In this map, we take a look and we see that based on REIS data, the national vacancy rate was 4.3% in the first quarter, and vacancy rates ranged from 3.2% in New York, New Jersey, to 5.5% in the Southwest. Regions that are in brown were at or below the national average, and regions in blue were above the national rate. And according to Reese data, the national vacancy rate was unchanged from a year ago. But the rate has declined significantly from 2009 when it was 8%. And this is at the same period of time as when the rate of home ownership began to decline. The rate declined to around 4.4% in 2013, and the vacancy rate has remained stable since then. And according to the Census Bureau, for the entire U.S., the rental vacancy rate was 7% in the first quarter, and that was also unchanged from a year ago. When we take a look at rents across the country, rents were up by 3.2% nationally, according to Reese. And despite the increase, rent gains have slowed relative to 2015 and 2016, when rents were increasing by about 6% a year. Rents grew in all regions of the country. You can see the whole country is in blue. The 6 regions in darker blue increased faster than the national average, led for the 7th consecutive quarter by the Northwest, where rents were up by 6.8%. Reese covers 274 market areas, and rents increased in 255 of those 274 areas over the past year. Now let's take a quick look at building permits. Single-family permits here are shown in blue, and multifamily are shown in orange. The number of single-family homes permitted nationally was up by 13% during the first quarter relative to a year ago. Permits were up in all regions except for a slight decline of 2% in the Northwest. But to put that into proper context, the Northwest had a very large increase the year before. It was up by 22%. 6 regions had a double-digit increase, led by the Southwest, which was up by 17%. The number of multifamily units permitted, again shown in orange, declined by 3% nationally. And the number of units permitted was up in 6 regions, led by a 41% gain in the Rocky Mountains and a 35% increase in New York, New Jersey. The number of multifamily units permitted declined in the other 4 regions, led by a 23% decline in the Pacific. So, in summary of the market conditions, year-over-year job growth for the first quarter was 1.6%. Sales markets remained relatively balanced throughout the country, with some areas of tightness. Home prices continued to increase in the first quarter, and total sales increased by 1%. Rental market conditions remained tight or slightly tight in many markets around the country, and rents increased by more than 3% nationally, while vacancy rates remained stable. And now let's talk a little bit about home ownership. Here we see the annual home ownership rate from 1965 to 2016. And from 1965 to 1994, the home ownership rate averaged 64%. We see that it began to increase in 1995 and reached a peak of 69% in 2004. Since 2005, the rate declined until reaching a rate of 63.4% in 2016. This large decline in the home ownership rate since 2005 also coincides with the decline in the national vacancy rate since 2009, as a lot of these households switched from being homeowners moving to the rental side of the market. We have a very significant development that we've seen in the first quarter of 2017 regarding new household formation. The number of new owner households outnumbered the number of new renter households for the first time since the fourth quarter of 2006. So possibly showing that some of these trends may be switching. We may be moving back towards more home ownership at this point. This map shows the home ownership rate for the first quarter of 2017 at the state level. Nationally, the home ownership rate during the first quarter was 63.6%. States in the 2 shades of blue have a higher home ownership rate than the national average, while the states in brown have rates that are lower than the national average. Rates ranged from lows of 42, 52, and 54% in D.C., New York State, and Nevada, to highs of 74% in Minnesota and 75% in South Carolina and West Virginia. The rate in California is 55%, while 8 states have a rate that's above 70%. And finally, let's consider the impact of millennials moving forward, which I know a number of our members of the panel are going to be discussing. This table shows the homeownership rate by 3 different generations: baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials, when they were in certain age cohorts. You can see that when baby boomers and Gen Xers were in that 25 to 34-year-old age group, their homeownership rate was higher than for the millennials in that same group. You can see the baby boomers had a rate of 41%, the Gen Xers 40%, whereas the millennials at 35%. The reason that it was lower for the millennials is probably for a variety of different reasons: the housing market downturn, the Great Recession, as well as rising levels of debt amongst young folks. But as people get older, the home ownership rate increases. And you can see that with the baby boom generation and the Gen Xers. As they moved into that 35 to 54-year age group, their home ownership rate went up. So we expect to see a similar kind of increase with the millennials, but we're not really sure by how much that's going to increase. And I'm going to leave that to the panel members to discuss in more detail. If you'd like additional information, please go to the U.S. Housing Market Conditions website, which is at huduser.gov. You can talk with your local regional or field economist, or you can feel free to get in touch with me. Thank you very much, and at this point, I'll hand things back to Matt.
Thank you, Kevin, for that information analysis. Now I'd like to invite our panel of experts up to the stage now for today's forum. And as we do that, I want to, as a reminder, tell you that we'll be fielding questions later in the program. And there are 2 ways you can submit your questions. First, by email at findyourplace@hud.gov, and on Twitter using the hashtag findyourplace. Again, email findyourplace@hud.gov, and on Twitter using the hashtag findyourplace. And you can also get updates via social media by following at HUD User News and at HUD.gov. Now, introducing our panelists. John Spader is a Senior Research Associate for Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies. Those are the folks who produce the widely respected annual State of the Nation's Housing Report. And the 2017 report will be released in a couple of weeks. So, John, welcome. Christine Peel is the Executive Director of the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, a housing counseling organization that works directly with people and families hoping to buy a home or hoping to keep their homes. Christine brings an important consumer voice to our panel today. Christine, thank you for being here. Dr. Lawrence Yun is the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of Research for the National Association of Realtors. And, of course, the realtors are, of course, on the front lines of homeownership, on the ownership marketplace, and Dr. Yu's insights will be most valuable to today's discussion. And we can't discuss homeownership without the financing needed to buy a home. For that, we're happy to welcome Joel Kahn, Associate Vice President of Industry Surveys and Forecast for the Mortgage Bankers Association. And now our moderator. Diana Olick is an Emmy Award-winning real estate reporter for CNBC. Diana reports on our nation's housing markets. She's fluent in the issues we'll be discussing today, and most importantly, she asks very probing questions, which would be helpful. Diana, welcome. I turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me and for having all of us. Thank you all for being here. I would like to start with a tweet, because that's what we do nowadays. When we were sitting back there waiting, I tweeted out that I was at the Homeownership Forum, and I said that President Trump had declared June National Homeownership Month, and I got some replies. And I'd like to read you one from somebody that says, "It's amazing that the policy push to a, quote, ownership society in the 2000s has now fueled a rental society." And I think that's a great place to kick off, because we talked a lot in the early days about homeownership society, pushing homeownership to a point where perhaps too many people got into homes that shouldn't have been there, who couldn't afford them. We know what happened to the mortgage market. And now we're back here talking once again after the biggest crisis, at least I've ever seen and most of us ever have, about home ownership.